Just give us a second. Okay, yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. As for those of you who've just joined, my name's Jack. I'm the executive director of an organization called One for the World. And I used to live in London and used to work roughly where you guys work, but now I'm based in Berlin. But I spend a lot of my time actually doing outreach to companies in the UK and particularly in the US about effective giving, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. And at the end of today, as a thank you for turning up, we're going to send you a survey where you can direct a £10 donation to any charity of your choice. And it hasn't happened yet, but one of these days someone's going to troll me by recommending a really, really, really ineffective charity, and that's fine. We'll still make the donation on your behalf, but we might do it slightly resentfully. Anyway, we're going to help today, I hope, to give you some tools to work out what an effective charity to donate to might be, and give you some examples, and also talk about the kind of philosophy of effective giving. So to kick off, I just want to put these 4 statements on the screen, and I'll read them quickly, but as I'm reading them, think about whether you agree with each of them. So the first one is, it's important to help others. The second one, people are of equal moral value. The third one, our resources are limited. And the fourth one, helping more is better than helping less. Now, those statements, I think, are quite uncontroversial. The majority of people agree with at least 3 and usually all 4 of these statements. But the reason we start here is that the implications of them are actually quite profound. So the first statement, it's important to help others. We kind of believe this in our everyday life. If we see, even on a very trivial level, someone struggling to open a door or they've dropped their shopping and we can help, we think we should, and we do. And if on a more profound level, if a family member or friend comes to us and has a problem, we think we know the solution, then it's not just a matter of arbitrary judgment whether or not we help them. We think we should. If we knew the solution to a problem that a friend of ours had, we would think it was bad form not to help them find that solution and try and put it into practice. So we think it's important to help other people. The second one is usually the most controversial statement. People are of equal moral value, because every time you say this, someone thinks, yes, but what about axe murderers? And axe murderers do exist, and they're not of equal moral value with everybody else. But what we're getting at here is a philosophical concept called impartiality. And what that says is, if we have 2 people and we don't know anything else about them, we should assume that they have an equal claim to being happy and healthy and fulfilled. And I can demonstrate this to you by thinking about the opposite. So let's say I put a picture on the screen of 2 people and said to you, right, everyone, we're going to take a vote on which one of these 2 people we should help. You'd probably feel really uncomfortable about that, because you don't have any information to make that choice in a reasonable way. You don't know whether one of them is more virtuous than the other. You don't know whether one of them is more in need than the other. You don't know anything about them. And so you'd be worried that at best you'd just be guessing, and at worst you might be influenced by some kind of bias or prejudice. And so this impartiality thing is really important, because our starting point should be that absent any other information, everybody is equally worth helping. The third and the fourth ones are particularly uncontroversial, although I did poll these at a major management consultancy and not everyone agreed with the third or the fourth statement, which is curious, but nonetheless, if they have infinite resources of some sort, maybe they'll get in touch and I can help them deploy them. Most of us recognize we don't have infinite stuff. We probably don't have infinite money. We probably don't have infinite time and any other type of resource. And the second statement, helping more is better than helping less, just seems trivially true. It would be great to do more good rather than less good. That seems sort of true by definition. But when we combine these statements, they come out with a very interesting implication, which is, once we recognize that we have limited time and attention and money, and that helping more is better than helping less, it becomes a morally good thing to try and do the most good we can with the resources that we have. So we only have a finite amount of stuff, and helping more is better than helping less. So it's morally good for us to try to be as efficient and effective as possible in deploying the resources we have to do good. So this brings us on to One for the World. We are a movement of people trying to revolutionize charitable giving to end extreme poverty. And we do that by asking people to give 1% or more of their income to the most cost-effective charities working in global health and poverty. Now, that's a big statement. You're probably thinking, why 1%? How do you calculate that? What are the most effective charities working in global health and poverty? Well, that's what the whole of today's talk is about. But we believe if we get enough people to do this, we can actually end one of the great tragedies of our time, which is extreme poverty and the terrible effects that it has on people's health and livelihoods. And as I said earlier, as a thank you, for coming today, we're going to donate £10 to any charity that you choose, and you'll be able to tell us about that in a survey that we're going to send out at the end of the presentation. So at this point, I'd like you to think about whatever the last donation you made to charity was. So think of any donation that you've made, last one, what was the donation, and how much research did you do before you gave that gift to a charity? Because only 35% of donors do any research at all on charitable gifts. So 2/3 of us will hand over money to a charity without knowing anything about what it does. And you might think, well, I would never do that. But I do that, and I literally work in effective giving. Because, I mean, I don't know about you, but this is the summer of weddings, right? Because everyone's been waiting for 3 years to get married because of the pandemic. So I'm going to go to 6 weddings this summer, and every single one of them is going to say, hey, please don't give me a wedding present. Please donate to this charity that I've nominated. And I'm going to give that charity some money without knowing anything about it, because I feel like I don't have a choice. Likewise, I'm sure you've been approached by someone in the office who says, I'm running a marathon for this charity. It's really important to me. Will you give me £10? And you say yes, and just hand over £10. So 2/3 of us will just give money to charity really without knowing anything about what the charity does and how it's going to be used. Now, of the 1 in 3 of us who are doing some research, 2/3 of us are trying to validate a choice we've already made. So let's say that Andrew says, no birthday presents for me this year. Please give money to One for the World. Thank you, Andrew, in advance for your support. Much appreciated. You might look up what One for the World does. You might go on our website. If you're really diligent, you might go to the Charity Commission or the IRS and look up our finances. But you've already made this choice to support us. You're just doing a tiny bit of due diligence before you give. Now, in contrast to this, only 3 out of every 100 donors does comparative research between different nonprofits and then gives on the basis of relative performance. And this is wild because we just don't treat any other decision, economic decision in our lives like this. You know, you guys will know this. You don't buy an insurance policy, you don't buy a car, you don't go on holiday without using comparison sites extensively to try to find the best value for money. I mean, Money Saving Expert is possibly the best website ever produced by the UK, and you don't make a financial decision without going on there and looking at all the different options and seeing which one is highest value. I don't even walk into a coffee shop to order a takeaway coffee without looking on Google to see which one has the most stars and which one's run by someone from Australia or New Zealand. And yet, when it comes to donating to charity, we don't do anything like this level of due diligence. And why is that? Because we're prepared to put this level of due diligence into really small decisions as well as really big ones. We think there's a couple of reasons for this. So the first one is most people believe that most people working in the charitable sector are doing a decent job trying to take on hard problems. And I've worked in the charitable sector my whole career for over 10 years now, and I can tell you that that is true. The charitable sector is full of people who are earnestly trying to make a difference to really difficult problems. But the second reason is, if we ask people, what do you think the difference is between the average charity and the best charity in the world in terms of impact? Most people say that they think the best nonprofits are between 1.5 and 2.5 times more impactful than an average nonprofit. And what I want you to remember here is that the actual difference, which I will demonstrate to you today, is between 100 and 1,000 times more impact. And if we knew that and had that at the front of our minds, I think we'd be more likely to do a lot of due diligence on our giving. Now, I'm going to launch a quick poll at this point, just to see whether people in the audience know how many charities there are in the UK. So you can vote on this as I'm continuing through the presentation, and we'll look at the results in just a second. Now, when you think about that charitable donation that you made, the last one that you made, think about what caused you to do that, what motivated you. And there's a good chance that the motivation is on the screen at the moment. So maybe it's one of these ones on the left, which we call the personal approach. So you have some sort of personal connection to the charity that you're giving to. It helped or affected somebody you know, it's local to you, somewhere you volunteer, etc. Or maybe it's one of the reasons on the right. It's very transparent, you found evidence that what they do is actually helping, it's cost effective. Now, I'm just going to end this poll. It looks like the votes, most people went for 160,000. Well, the right answer is actually about 160,000. So actually about 165,000 registered charities in England and Wales. There are about 1.7 million charities, well, they call them non-profits there in the US. So we need to have some way of distinguishing between this vast array of organizations that want our help, most of them working on problems that we'd like to see solved. Most of them have a very convincing argument for why they should be funded. And so we're inevitably going to use one of the reasons on the screen or something like that. But there's two important things I want to get across here. The first one is there are people in effective giving who would come and give a presentation like this and say, personal approach to giving is wrong. It's a mistake. Your money's going to be wasted. Don't do it. Stop all of your donations to all the charities you like and just donate to the ones we recommend. I am not saying that at all. Not only do I think that's an absolutely shocking way of trying to persuade anyone of anything, we need to have a degree of humility about our ability to identify great giving opportunities and to recognize that we can't assess every charity in the world. And actually, there's nothing wrong with giving for personal reasons. I do it. Everyone I know in effective giving has some charities that they support because they have a personal connection to them. But what we are saying, if you think back to the previous slide, is that at the moment, only 3% of people are doing data-driven giving. That is, only 3% of people are comparing different nonprofits and letting the data tell them where to give. And in an ideal world, you start this off from a position of agnosticism. So you start off saying, I'm agnostic about who I help and where they live and what kind of help they need. I'm just going to follow the numbers to try and find the best giving opportunities. So we know that this type of giving is neglected because only 3% of people are doing it. And the other thing we know is that in high-income countries, most people give between 2 and 6% of their income to charity. And so if you were to take One for the World's 1% pledge, you would still have plenty of room to do personal giving, to give to causes that you happen to know really well or ones that you're particularly passionate about. So we think there's plenty of room to give with our heads and our hearts at the same time. Now, my guess is that because you chose to dial into this, that you have some interest in charitable giving already. And I'm probably not talking to that many people who think that giving to charity is a bad idea. But nonetheless, well, someone just left the meeting actually, so maybe I just outed them. That hasn't happened before. That's very funny. Bad charitable giving, what? Denied. Anyway, I think it helps even if we're really committed to charitable giving to remind ourselves why. And the best rationale that I've heard for that is an analogy called the drowning child thought experiment, and it comes from a prominent bioethicist called Peter Singer, and it goes like this. Let's imagine that we're walking through a park, and in the middle of the park there's a pond, and in the middle of the pond there's a child struggling to stay above the water. Would we jump in and try and save the child from drowning? Well, yeah, of course we would. We would recognize that that is an amazing moral opportunity. The opportunity to do something absolutely amazing that we would remember for the rest of our lives. It would probably be one of the best things we ever did, to jump in and save a child from drowning when no one else was there to help. Now imagine that the reason we're walking through this park is that we're on our way to work and we're about to give a big pitch. So we've got our best clothes on, we've got our phone in our pocket, we've got our note cards with all of our notes for our presentation on. Would we still jump in and try and save the child from drowning? Well, yeah, of course we would. We would recognize that the cost of replacing items like our best clothes or our phone is completely trivial next to saving the life of a child who's otherwise going to drown. We would recognize that the value of saving the life of the child is just so much greater than the value of some fairly trivial material things. Now imagine that instead of walking through a park and seeing this pond and seeing this child, we just know that they exist. So we can't see them and we can't jump in and help them directly, but we know that they exist and we know that they have the same need of help, that they'll die without outside help. Would we still be prepared to donate the cost of our clothes, the cost of our mobile phone to save their life, in exactly the same way that we were prepared to jump into the pond and pay to replace those items without thinking twice? Well, when we put it like that, answers vary quite a bit. And this teaches us a couple of important things. The first thing it shows us is that when the moral choice is in front of us, we see it with great clarity. And so when we actually see a child in front of us and know that we can directly intervene to help them, we do that without thinking. But the minute we make that choice abstract, would we be prepared to undergo the same amount of material cost, the same amount of inconvenience, but to save a child that we can't see right in front of us, we become less sure about whether or not we would do that. And actually, we're kind of seeing this with events in Ukraine at the moment, because the immediacy of it has really clarified our thinking as a country about what we want to do about refugees from Ukraine. And there's very, very strong public support for helping them. But when the exact same moral position was there with refugees from Arab Spring countries or from failed states in the Middle East, we didn't see it in the same way. And some of that is to do with the immediacy of the presentation and how much we identify with the people who are involved. So a very interesting case study of this thing of when we look at it abstractly, the two situations seem extremely similar. But when we look at it concretely, we sometimes see it in a different way. The other thing that this teaches us is that when we don't have the direct ability to intervene with an identifiable participant, that is the actual child that we can actually see in the pond, we don't tend to see the moral choice in the same way. And this is important because we're actually in this position all the time. It's very unlikely that you're going to walk past a pond on your way home from work and see a drowning child and have the opportunity to jump in. But tragically, the pond is not really a pond, and the child isn't just one child. What the pond represents here is extreme poverty. And extreme poverty is defined by the World Bank as living by consuming less than $1.90 of resources per day. And that's adjusted for purchasing power. So that is literally the equivalent of being in London having about £1.50 per day of resources that you can consume. And when you think about that, you think, well, that just cannot be done. I mean, that cannot be done. There is no way. You couldn't even commute to work for £1.50. You definitely couldn't have, enough food. You couldn't clothe yourself. You couldn't rent somewhere to live, etc., etc. That would be impossible. And so we sort of mentally reject it because it's just inconceivable. But that is the inconceivable level of poverty that over 700 million people are living in. And because they're faced with these incredibly difficult choices of how do you prioritize when you can't really afford any of the things that you need, unfortunately, extreme poverty kills millions of people each year. So it's not just one child. Every day, around 14,500 children under the age of 5 are killed by extreme poverty. And that's because they don't have enough water to drink, they don't have enough food to eat, or most commonly, they get a disease which is completely treatable or completely preventable, but they don't have access to the resources either not to get sick or to get better. And these are things we treat routinely without thinking about them in high-income countries. That might be diarrhea leading to dehydration. That might be malaria. That might be a lack of vitamin A in their diet. And in a high-income country, you probably don't know anyone who's been affected by this. And if you did, it would be treatable, with an over-the-counter remedy for almost nothing. And yet, in low-income countries, this kills 14,500 children a day. Now, that's a very difficult number to get your head around. How do we get our heads around this massive number, nearly 15,000 children under the age of 5? Well, there's a really grim analogy for doing this, which is imagine a jumbo jet, and imagine that in every single seat on the plane, there's a child under 5. So you've got 4-year-old here, 3-year-old here, 5-year-old there, 1-year-old there. And then imagine that that plane crashes and everyone on board is killed. If that happened every hour, every day, all year, that would kill about the same number of children as are killed by extreme poverty. Now, of course, if that happened once in real life, there would be a huge reaction to it. We would have parliamentary hearings, we would ground aircraft until we knew they were safe, we would reform the whole aviation industry to make sure that never happened again. But the same way as we were talking about immediacy, clarifying our thinking, when it's not immediate, it's not newsworthy, we can't see the terrible picture and the terrible aftermath of a plane actually dropping from the sky, but the moral cost is exactly the same. It's the same number of children who are dying for absolutely no good reason. We just don't think about it with the same clarity because it happens in places where we don't see it. It's not newsworthy because it's happening all the time. And so we just don't have the same moral clarity around the issue as we would otherwise. Now, this sounds super depressing. We're talking about the death of innocent children, which is appalling. We are talking about the kind of moral burden of knowing that this is going on and that it's preventable and there's something we can do about it. And so this can feel like a very despairing point in the presentation, but what I want you to remember is the only thing we need to do to stop these children dying right now, we don't even have to jump into a pond and risk our material possessions or even our own safety. We just have to give, and we have to give to the most cost-effective charities in the world who are saving the lives of children like this every day. And so a critical part of this is working out where we really should give. And so at this point, I'm going to launch our second poll. I want you to imagine that you have $1,000 that you can donate to one sanitation program. And you've got three options, and you're trying to donate to the one that will provide the most years of healthy life for that $1,000. So you've got three options. You can give people chlorine to disinfect their drinking water. You can provide them with piped water and flushing toilets, or you can give children who are ill zinc and electrolyte salts. So I'd like you to vote now for the intervention that you think would provide the most years of healthy life per $1,000. So someone's already voted for chlorine. I've got one for zinc and electrolyte salts. Okay, first three votes split three different ways. Your name will not be attached to this, but obviously the purpose of this is to get bragging rights over your colleagues. So make a careful note of which one you went for, and we'll see who has the best instinct for global health and development work when we reveal the answers. Okay, so currently the most popular one is piped water and flushing toilets. Any last votes that need to come in before I move on and reveal the answers? Last 5 seconds. Okay, so in the end, we had one vote for chlorine, we had 8 votes for piped water and flushing toilets, and we had 5 votes for option 3, the zinc electrolyte salts. So this stuff is based on a set of research called the Disease Control Priorities Project. It is run out of an American university, I forget which one, I think in Washington State, and it's a massive macro study of health interventions in low-income countries to see which ones work the best. And their results suggest the following. On each of these slides, a heart represents an extra year of healthy life that you get if you fund this intervention. So for those of you who went for piped water and flushing toilets, for $1,000, you get about 6 months of extra healthy life. Now, you might be wondering, why is that not more? Because obviously this is the way that we tackle a lot of sanitation problems in high-income countries. And the answer is basically the cost. The cost of installing that type of infrastructure is really high. And so even though it's very effective, if you think about trying to provide a genuine two-way sanitation and sewage system in a remote village in sub-Saharan Africa, the cost is extremely high. And so even though the benefit is very big, it actually costs you way more than $1,000 to do this. And so you can only take credit for some of the benefit. And when you look at the total cost of the project, the total number of people helped, and how much they're helped on average, and you do some division of that, you end up with 6 months of healthy life for $1,000. Now, I have 2 bits of good news here for those of you who went for this. The first one is the program actually works. So of that 170,000 nonprofits in the UK, a very small amount, probably as low as about 5 to 10%, can actually prove that what they do measurably makes the world a better place and addresses the problem that they're trying to address. And you're already in that category. We know that this works from randomized control trials. And the second thing is, this is super cheap. So in a high-income country, we're usually prepared to spend between $75,000 and $150,000 for a year of extra healthy life. And so you're getting amazing value for money here. However, if you went for household chlorination, you are going to get about 10 times more benefit for the same $1,000. And if you went for zinc and oral rehydration salts, you are going to get 33 years of healthy life for that same $1,000. Now, why is this? Well, it actually comes down to the cost of the intervention again. Giving people zinc and electrolyte salts is incredibly cheap, incredibly cheap. These things can be produced and shipped and given to people for way less than £1. And so you're able for your $1,000 just to treat thousands of children. And because a treatment is also very effective, so those of you who've ever had bad dehydration or even just a terrible hangover and have taken oral rehydration salts will know that they're incredibly effective at rehydrating you. Because you combine extremely high effectiveness with extremely low unit cost, you end up with massive benefit, even for a relatively small investment like $1,000. But of course, waterborne illnesses aren't the only thing that we could fund. So what happens if we just broaden our search to any disease in a low-income country? The World Bank's best guess is that for $1,000 spent treating and preventing malaria, we're able to get an additional 200 years of healthy life. Now, of course, funding sanitation programs is super important and it is worth spending money on. And as I said earlier, all of these programs are actually really cost effective and they all work, which is great. But what we're seeing here is exactly what I said at the start, which is the difference between an average and a brilliant nonprofit is 100 to 1,000x in impact. And you're seeing it on the screen. This is a 400x differential between piped water and flushing toilets and malaria treatment and prevention. So when we're giving, we probably can't give 400 times more to charity than we do right now. But we can choose to give to a more effective charity and get 400 times the benefit. And what we said at the start was helping more is better than helping less. So when we have a finite amount of resources, if we have this opportunity, this is an enormous moral opportunity that all of us have to try and do an amazing, staggering amount of good for relatively small amounts of money. Now, at this point, I want to introduce you to Zawadi. This is Zawadi, and in this picture, she's 4 years old, and she's waiting while her mother buys flour from their local village miller. And that orange machine in the center of the picture, it's called a dosifier, and it adds life-saving vitamins and minerals to flour. So we do this in high-income countries where we add vitamins and iron to breakfast cereal. You'll see that on breakfast cereals you buy all the time in the UK, fortified with vitamins and iron. So you're eating the same food, it's just been fortified with more stuff, so it does more good. Now, unfortunately, Zawadi was malnourished as a baby because no matter how hard her parents tried, they just couldn't provide her with enough calories to meet her needs. But I'm really delighted to report that because of simple interventions like this dosifier, she's now happy and healthy, and she's survived her 5th birthday. So she's not one of those children we talked about earlier who have tragically died before they reach their 5th birthday. And that means she has her whole life ahead of her, she can realize her potential, and she has a pretty good chance of living until she's 60, having survived her 5th birthday. Now, why am I telling you that story? Well, for 2 things. First of all, we know that behavioral research has shown us that we identify with individual participants and are more motivated to give when we see a moving individual story. And so I wanted to connect for you the numbers approach that we use in effective giving, which can sometimes seem a bit impersonal and a bit disconnected. I wanted to reinforce that there are real people who sit behind this. Every one of those hearts on the previous slides represents a real person living in extreme poverty who can really be helped. And people who live in extreme poverty, they are just like us. They are just like us. They have a best friend and a favorite song and aspirations for the future. They are just like us. They just happen to have been born into the most desperate circumstances. And the second reason that I wanted to show this to you is there are many charities who would have started their presentation with this. But we want you to give with both your head and your heart. So we want you to give with your heart when you are moved, as we all are, by the picture of this wonderful young girl who now has her whole life ahead of her because of such a simple, cost-effective intervention. But we want you to give with your head when you say it's not just about Zawadi, it's about helping as many Zawadis as possible. Because what a lot of nonprofits will do is put up a picture like this and really inspire you to help this particular person. But of course, there are thousands of people who are in the same situation who could also feature in an amazing moving photograph. And so we need to try to take that emotional imperative that we have when we see an amazing picture of someone who we really want to help on a personal level, but then extrapolate that to try and help as many of those people as possible. And I think you can do both. I think you can give with your head and your heart really easily. And I think the story of Zawadi is a great way of illustrating the thousands and thousands of people that we can help if we give effectively. So, I hope I've convinced you of a couple of things at this point. The first one is that it is very difficult to tell which the best charities in the world are. You know, we put up a quiz, you guys are smart people, most of you got it wrong, I got it wrong when I first did it. It's very difficult for us to know, and intuition is a bad way of judging. The second thing I hope I've convinced you of is that the difference between an average and an amazing charity is between 100 and 1,000 times the impact. And we saw that on the screen. And a third thing I hope I've convinced you of is we have the same moral opportunity that we would have if we dived into a pond and pulled out a child who was at risk of drowning every single day. And we just have to make the same sort of sacrifice we would do to save a child right in front of us to access that moral opportunity. But if I have convinced you of that, the obvious question is, okay, where should we give? Well, we work with an organization called GiveWell, and they do about 20,000 hours a year of research into the most cost-effective charities in the world. So they're a serious academic institution who do thousands of hours of research trying to find where can we make the biggest difference for the smallest amount of money. And what we end up with is a list like this. So this is 5 of the 9 charities that GiveWell currently recommends. And you'll see they have a few things in common. They have very, very low unit cost. So, we were saying earlier, the zinc and electrolyte salts are so effective because it costs so little to do. Well, each of these unit costs is under $10. So you've got as low as 72 cents through Deworm the World to get rid of parasitic worms that live in children's gut and stop them going to school. You have only $2.18 for a year of vitamin A supplements. Vitamin A deficiency can cause you to go blind and can kill you. It kills about 200,000 children a year. And you have only $5 to provide a bed net for someone to sleep under in a malarial area. And malaria tragically still kills 400,000 people a year and is the single biggest killer of pregnant women on the planet. Now, the second thing they have in common is they take on really, really big problems. So I just gave you some of the stats on that. Malaria killing 400,000 people a year. The vitamin A supplementation killing nearly 200,000. So you've got low unit cost, massive, very severe problem. And then the third thing that they all have is they all have treatments which are very, very, very rigorously tested. So these are tested using randomized control trials, which we're all a bit more familiar with now than we used to be because of the coronavirus vaccines. This is how we tested and developed coronavirus vaccines, is using large-scale randomized control trials. Well, each of these interventions has a number of RCTs behind them that makes us really confident that it works. And it's kind of intuitive. We don't actually use intuition much in effective giving, but it is intuitive. If you have a lack of vitamin A in your diet and you get a vitamin A supplement, it is intuitive that that will remove the problem if you're having a lack of vitamin A. Actually, the most studied charity on here is Give Directly, which has over 80 randomized control trials showing that if you just give people money who live in extreme poverty, they will make incredible gains in health and wealth and happiness. And this is one of the most counterintuitive charities we support because a lot of people hear that and say, even actually, by the way, in low-income countries, a lot of governments say, no, you can't just give people money, they won't spend it wisely. But this has been studied over 80 times in a range of contexts over decades, and the evidence is absolutely incontrovertible. It provides enormous benefit. The rate of misuse is really low, the rate of fraud is really low, but the gains from it are extremely high, and it's incredibly efficient. Because you don't have to do loads of monitoring and evaluation. You don't need to have a big aid agency in the way. You just send people money using mobile banking. So a really amazing charity. And, all of the charities that we recommend, actually, they work in low-income countries. And the reason for that is you just get so much more. You get about 100x more for your money when you move it to a low-income country. And that's just because goods and services cost so much less. So imagine if you made a donation to a charity in London to provide mentoring, it might cost you £50 to have a volunteer mentor, turn up and do an hour's mentoring once you factor in all the overheads of the charity and so on and so forth. Well, that £50 might represent a month's wages in a sub-Saharan African country. And so once we move our money overseas, we're able to get so much more. So we might be able to fund a month of someone's time somewhere else. And that 100x differential is pretty consistent across lots of different countries and exchange rates and types of goods and service. Okay, let's imagine that I've convinced you that these charities are amazing, which I hope I have. If you're going to start giving, at some point you've got to talk about, well, how much and how often. And to do this, I like to use something called the How Rich Am I calculator. So you can visit this now on your computers. I'm going to put this in howrichamI.giving.org. Because the example I have on the screen is in US dollars, but you can do this in pounds. So it will, you can do it in the currency of the country where you live, and it will tell you a few things about your income. So I did this off someone who's earning a fairly average wage in the US, about $60,000 gross. And if you're earning that, you are in the top 1.4% of the global population by wealth, and you're earning about 18 times the global median. But the other thing that this calculator lets you do is see what happens if you donate a percentage of your income. So if this person were to give 1% of their income, they would still have a household income of just over $52,000. They'd still be in the top 1.4% of the population by wealth, and they would still be earning over 18 times the global median. But at the same time, they would be able to fund 106 of those bed nets that we were talking about that Against Malaria Foundation gives out, over 550 treatments for schistosomiasis, which is a parasitic worm disease that eats people's calories. And about every 5 years, someone who would otherwise likely have died will still be alive because of the treatments funded by this person. So obviously it is possible that you could buy one bed net and save someone's life from malaria because they were going to go on and get malaria and die. You happen to give them a bed net. But if you want to be sure, you need to look at the statistics and the average and say, well, how many bed nets do we need to give out until it's statistically probable that someone who we've given a bed net to hasn't got malaria, who would otherwise have got malaria, and it would have killed them. And by the way, when it comes to bed nets, that number is roughly 1,000. If you give out 1,000 bed nets, that is roughly enough that you can be pretty confident that someone who was going to get malaria and die now hasn't. And so the cost of saving a life through the Against Malaria Foundation is about $3,000 to $5,000, which is astonishingly cheap. Now, the reason that I think this How Rich Am I calculator is so important, and the reason it actually converted me to effective giving when I first saw it as a graduate in the UK, is that it shows us, I think, two things. First of all, even when we don't feel like we're doing that well, actually on a global perspective, we are in an extremely fortunate position. That is true of almost everyone in high-income countries. I mean, it isn't literally true of everyone. Some people have debts or caring responsibilities or other financial pressures on them. I'm not trying to downplay that, but for the majority of us, we are in an extremely fortunate position if we zoom out onto a global level. But the second thing it does is it shows you how little 1% is going to make a difference to your life if you give it away. Because I think we can all agree that this person is not going to have a materially worse quality of life because they take home $52,047 rather than just over $52,500. That they're not going to get to the end of the year and not be able to pay off their student loan or not be able to buy a house or not be able to go on holiday just because of that 1%. It may be that they can't achieve some of those things, but they weren't going to achieve them anyway. But the spiritual and ethical and moral richness of their life, knowing that every 5 years someone is going to be alive who otherwise would have died, is enormous. And this, I think, is the key to giving by percentages, is if you give a low percentage of your income away, it's not going to change your material quality of life. But you can do a staggering amount of good if you give it to the best charities in the world. And I like to do a guarantee at this point that One for the World underwrites, which is if in a year's time you've taken our 1% pledge and you write to me and say, this has materially reduced my quality of life, I'll give you the money back. So we won't take it off the charity, we'll give the money to charity anyway, but we'll refund you that year's donations. And the reason that we make that guarantee is that we just know from thousands of people who've done this that it will not materially affect your life. And if enough of us band together, we can make a huge difference. Now, I don't want to spend too much time on this slide, but there is another part of this, which is, well, why give regularly? Why not give at the end of the year? Some people like to make a big gift at the end of the year. And the basic reality behind that is it's much easier for the charity to plan, and it's much easier for you to plan if you do it regularly. So I've worked in the charitable sector my whole career. We rely on monthly recurring revenue to do what we do. We can't hire a member of staff if someone gives us a big lump of money now, but we don't know for a year whether or not they're going to come back in again. But we can if we can see that someone's been donating for 12 months every month, and we're going to know within a month whether or not they're going to keep going. So that monthly recurring revenue is critical. And the evidence from both sides suggests that you achieve more. It's easier for you to give more as a donor and in a planned and systematic way, and it's easier for the charity to do a great job with it. And if enough of us band together, we can have a staggering impact through this. So this is what One for the World has achieved since it was launched. Actually, this number is now just over $3 million that our members have donated, and we've saved just over 500 lives. Now, none of the people who are One for the World members are living in, rags and eschewing global capitalism. It's not happening. they are still able to go on holiday, they're still able to buy a house, they're still able to eat out, they still get takeaway coffees, they still do all the things that we want to do to have a nice and comfortable life. But by giving just 1 cent on the dollar or 1 penny on the pound, we are able to achieve amazing things. And the figure I'm proudest of in One for the World is that one in the bottom right, that when this snapshot was taken, 432 people were alive who otherwise would have died without the interventions that we funded. And actually that number is now about 504. So finally, just before we go to the Q&A, you might be wondering, well, why would I do this through One for the World? Why not go directly to these charities? Well, you can. It actually doesn't make any difference to us. But there's 3 things that we do that you might want to take advantage of, and we do them for free. So the first thing is, we will allow you to make 1 donation to us that we split between multiple charities, and we do that for free. So if you want to give £10, but you want £2 to go to AMF and £4 to go to Give Directly and £4 to go to Helen Keller, we will do that for you. So that just simplifies your giving. Secondly, we will tell you every 3 months exactly what happened with your money. So you choose where it goes, and then you'll get a personalized impact report every 3 months that shows you, right, Andrew, you gave this amount, you gave £30 over the last 3 months. That means you've bought 2 bed nets, funded 10 vitamin A supplements, and given £10 to someone living in extreme poverty. And that is a level of reporting you just don't get very often from nonprofits. And thirdly, we stay on top of the latest research in this area. So it is time intensive, and it takes expertise to judge consistently and on a recurring basis which of these charities is still doing an amazing job. And we do remove charities from our list if they fall below our bar, and we add new ones if they come along and can prove their effectiveness. And we do that on an ongoing basis, so you don't have to worry about it. It's a little bit like investing in stocks and shares. If you have the time and expertise to find the best stocks and shares on the market, you should. But most of us just give to a managed fund or an index fund or something where we don't have to think about it too much because we don't have the time or we don't understand it well enough. And just to emphasize, we do all of that for free. So any money that hits our bank account from you is passed on in full. Our operating costs are looked after by grants and by high net worths, and we don't take any money out of your donations. On the pound gets given to these charities. So what would I like you to do? I would like you to give 1% or more of your income to the most cost-effective charities in the world. And if you want to do that, you can go to onefortheworld.co.uk/donate, and you can get set up in just a few clicks. I am also very interested to hear your questions, and I'm also very happy to help with one-to-one advice. If you want to give in an unusual way, if you're not sure about where to give, you'd like further advice, my email and my LinkedIn are on the screen. I could probably even meet you in person as I'm coming to the UK soon. So I'd love to hear from you. But I really hope that some of you will join our movement, because we can actually end some of the most severe problems affecting people in the world. Malaria will end during our lifetimes if enough of us join this fight, in the same way that we eradicated smallpox, in the same way that we've just eradicated wild polio. We can take on these massive problems through a grassroots movement of people making a tiny, tiny, tiny gift each month. And if enough of us do it, we can save tens, hundreds of thousands of lives. So I really hope that you'll join us in this movement. But for now, I'm really interested to hear your questions.
Thanks very much, Jack. Good talk. Before we take some questions, is it worth saying something about giving directly from salary, like for income tax?
Yes, so giving through payroll giving is the most efficient way of giving. It saves you the most tax, and it results in the most going to the charity. If you have the opportunity to do that, we really recommend it. And I will put our charity number into the chat so that you can find us easily on that payroll giving system. But if you have the opportunity to do that, it is the most efficient way of donating to charities. So you should always take that opportunity if it's available.
Thanks, yeah, and I see that Ashman's helpfully posted a link to the form to fill in if you want to do that through payroll. Yeah, so maybe we can take some questions. Maybe Ashman, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I was actually just going to highlight the payroll giving thing, and I'm trying to figure out from people if we can fill this form out electronically rather than have to print it off and bring it in. So I'll figure that out and let people know.
I see that Desiree is on the call. Do you know anything about that, Desiree?
Sorry, forgot to unmute myself. I was talking. I just responded to Ashton actually. Yeah, you can fill that out electronically. I'm not sure what PDF reader you use, but I use Adobe, and there's a functionality to fill that out and sign electronically, and then send the filled form to payroll at faculty.
Cool. I also had a question for Jack, which is like, so I'm a fully already bought into effective altruism. I like Peter Singer, and then this analogy, the drowning child, I buy. I guess this 1% number that you guys have come up with is somewhat calculated based on being able to spread it and getting people to sign up. But I really struggle to come up with a number like for myself that I can like ethically justify. That's not like 95%, like go and live as a hermit and donate everything else. Like, how do you sort of decide when you've done enough?
It's funny because this is the thing that Peter Singer says he feels least. He feels like he lives his values least when it comes to this question, and he gives 35 to 50% of his income away, I think. So the problem with the drowning child analogy is, if you follow it to its logical conclusion, you should keep giving away every single thing that you own until you need it more than the person who's going to otherwise die. So until the next pound in your pocket is better spent on you than the person in extreme poverty, ethically you shouldn't stop until you reach that point. But that's clearly not practical. No one's going to do that. And actually, we don't really recommend it because the likelihood is that you'll do severe damage to yourself if you do that. So there are a few different benchmarks out there. Our one is designed to be super affordable. So 1% is something where if you have disposable income in a high income country, you can probably afford it. The next benchmark above that would be the average, which is 2 to 6% of your income. The next one above that would be what's called the Giving What We Can pledge. They host that calculator, which is 10% of your income. And the way that I usually say, talk about this to people is, it is an amazing thing to give away, I think, even 1% of your income. If you feel like you can afford to do more, that is even more amazing. Imagine the difference you can make if you gave away 10% of your income or even more. But try to pick a level that you're going to be able to stick to, and that isn't going to get you in hot water with your other financial dependents. If you have a partner, or some people who do effective giving have a carve out for their kids, where anything they spend on their kids is not, they're not going to give any of that away, but after that they're prepared to give away a percentage. I think the most important thing is that we give something, and that we do it consistently and over the long term. So we model this because we look at who are we going to recruit. The most important factor in how much someone gives is how long they stay with us. It's not how much they give at the start. Because if you think about it, if you start now, let's say you're my age, I'm sort of early 30s, I might be donating monthly for another 30 years. So actually, the amount that I'm able to give over that time, if I stick it out for that lifetime commitment, is going to be so big. Now, okay, it would be bigger if I gave, an order of magnitude more of my salary away. But really, what I want people to do is take this commitment to the idea that every month we're just going to give a percentage of our income away. And then you can play around with what you can afford. For what it's worth, I give about 12.5% of my income away. And I anticipate that going up as I go around over my lifetime. But I don't want people who are on this call hearing about this for the first time to think, well, the barrier to entry is I have to give away 10% of my income to really be doing a good thing, because that's just not true. You can achieve an amazing amount giving less.
Cool. And just another shill for the payroll giving. If you give away 10%, you're really only giving away 4% of what you would be getting if you're in the, 6% if you're in the higher tax band. So yeah, cool.
Yeah, payroll giving super efficient.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Jack, for the talk. I thought it was super interesting, and like Ashwin, I've been interested in these topics for a while and thought it was a really clear and compelling articulation of the case. So thanks. I'd be really interested to hear what your thoughts are on what is the best counter argument against giving at all, or giving based on this logical framework you've laid out. What do you think the best counter argument is, and what would your retort to it be?
Yeah, so the best counter argument to giving is really bad, which is probably something like I don't want to. I know that sounds really facetious and I'm not doing a good job of representing the other side, but unless your own needs are extreme, and unusual, and so there's a really compelling reason why you need to keep that money and spend it on yourself. The evidence suggests that if you just don't give to charity, you probably spend that money on stuff that you really didn't need. So I will try to steel man the argument on the other question you asked, but I just don't know what the steel man argument to giving nothing is. That there is a thing called patient philanthropy where you say, I'm not going to give now, I'm going to put it in a savings account and let it grow, or preferably in something linked to the stock market, and hope it grows and grows and grows and grows, and then I'll give it later. That's one strategy. There are some for and against things behind that, including whether you follow through and whether the best giving opportunities are now, which we think they might be. But yeah, when it comes to just not giving at all, I don't know. If anyone feels that and wants to really have a crack at it, go for it. In terms of the best reasons not to give the way we recommend, sort of to the causes we recommend, there are some problems that I think the technical name for them is wicked problems, which are just super, super complicated and have so many moving parts. And we tend to gravitate towards things that are easy to measure and relatively simple theories of change. So, for example, someone's going to get malaria, they sleep under a bed net that's been treated with insecticide, they're very much less likely to get malaria. If you want to look at something like economic development or gender justice, or reducing inequality, or actually one I'm quite passionate about is access to justice. So the idea that people can be treated justly by the law in their country, those things are much less treatable in this way. And so that's why I use the portfolio approach, which is I do most of my giving in effective giving, but I do some of it in things that I think are super important. So, for example, I support a UK charity called Reprieve, which represents people who are on death row or who have been the victim of extrajudicial killing, so a drone strike or a state-sponsored assassination or something like that. Because I think the principle of justice is super important. It's not quantifiable in the same way as how many lives were saved by this thing. It's more about the principle of that approach. So I think there's room for both, but I would always respect someone who said, I don't want to do all of my giving like this, because there are some things that just on principle I just think are so important.
Cool, thanks for that.
Makes sense, thanks. I agree also, the non-straw man version of my first question is a difficult one to come up with, so fair enough.
Do we have any questions here in the room? Or any more online? Well, maybe one brief final one for me then. Actually, following on from Tom's question, is there any way that we can effectively quantify the impact of charitable donations in aid of something like justice, like you said? It's much harder to translate that into some kind of tangible, measurable, positive change in the way that you can something impacting public health, say. Is there any way that those issues remain important in many cases? Is there any way for us to apply a similar strategy to what the world is doing to that kind of charitable donation, or is it really something that's kind of practically limited to health-related matters?
So you can apply stuff to it. You just need to be careful about how much confidence you have in it. So this is actually what my wife does. She's an evaluator of complex development projects, but usually ones that are hard to quantify. So things like access to justice or the repairing of failed or conflict-affected countries, stuff like that. And the way you do it is you kind of draw a theory of change that says, we believe we're going to do this, which is then going to do this, which is going to do this, which is going to have this positive outcome. And then you look for indicators that may be happening and try to collect as much data as you can. And it can be done. The reason that you want to be less confident in those is you can't run a randomized control trial. So you can't say, we're going to divide Rwanda in half, and we're going to give exactly half of the people living there randomly access to justice and the other half not. And then we're going to see at the end which one has, what the difference in outcome is. Because, it's not practical, is it? It's like people always say about gun control in the US. What we need to do is just go back to the 1990s and create a copy of the US and then have them exist in parallel universes for 30 years and do gun control in one, and we'll work out whether it works. So you don't have that opportunity. So it is possible to come up with these theories of change, and some are better evidence than others. And you can look at things like track record of the organization. Did you get policy change? Are there independent indicators like life expectancy, or so for justice it might be, the number of, one indicator of justice is the number of acquittals, because in very corrupt systems everyone gets convicted. So there are independent indicators you can look for. But you just want to be careful about how confident you are in saying, well, this definitely works, or this theory of change, it is robust.
Yeah, interesting. Thanks very much. But yeah, I think we're out of time. But thanks very much, Jack, for a really interesting talk, and for everyone for attending. Jack, if anyone's interested in getting in contact with more questions, Jack shared his details. We can share that on Slack as well. And Jack, did you manage to send around that Google form about the attendees?
Yeah, so I've just dropped it in the chat. So we'll donate £10 anywhere you like. Everyone always asks, the worst charity in the world is the Stanford University Endowment, because it's about $30 billion. So it's growing faster than they can spend it anyway. So it's literally complete waste of money. So if you really want to troll me, tell me to give £10 to the Stanford Endowment Fund, but otherwise, yeah, pick any charity you like, and I'll be glad to support it.
Great, thanks very much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jack. I have to shoot off to another meeting, but thanks again for that. And if there's anything else to follow up with.
All I'll do, Andrew, that was great, and the questions were really smart as well. All I'll do is just send you the form again to email out to the attendees. I've actually got to run to another meeting now, but I'll do that today, and then yeah, we'll make sure we make those donations and follow up with people.
Great, thanks again.
Awesome. All right, thanks. Bye.